we've saved you a seat. Welcome to Train Station at 8, a place to gather with friends and talk about music for a while, particularly video game music. This is episode 18, and today we're going to be tackling the music of the Elder Scrolls, which is a pretty broad topic because there's a lot of music and a lot of games. But joining me for that today are two guests, Kevin VanOrd, fellow podcaster and senior editor at GameSpot.com,
Hello.
and Joshua... Oh, hi, Kevin. Please, don't interrupt the host.
Oh.
You need manners, Kevin. Please.
Oh, man.
And
I thought you were introducing me.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm doing it again. Let's
You're
do what
doing
I
it again.
Yeah,
Two.
totally.
All right, take two.
I'll stop.
And Joshua Wise, also a fellow podcaster and theologian extraordinaire. Hello, Josh.
Hey, what's going on?
I assume that's on your business card.
The extraordinaire part is in transition at the moment.
Okay, let me guess they
extraordinaire
typoed it,
to
right?
Supreme or something like that, yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Theologian Supreme?
Yeah, when you level up as a theologian, it's weird. You don't really know what's next.
Yeah, what are you, like a level 8 theologian?
At this point, I think I'm technically a level 3. I have a BA and an MA, and I'm working on a PhD, so...
Okay, gotcha.
I don't...
You work
So
on
I
that.
assume if you're going to level up in the Elder Scrolls world of theology, it would say, now you must rest and meditate and write several papers on what you have learned.
Yeah, I've just passed that point.
Okay, very cool.
Good job.
So do you
I
choose to
applaud
upgrade
you
your
for that.
strength or your intelligence?
Dexterity.
Oh, yeah, that's key for a theologian.
Yeah,
You can run away from all those angry mobs.
indeed.
Screaming
I'm here
heresy!
Hey, can you introduce me?
Yeah, my brother, Steven. Hey, Steven, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Awesome. So, Elder Scrolls, right, everyone?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Hey,
Yay.
that's what this is.
Sorry, I roped you in, Josh.
I thought
Exactly.
this was about Zork. Anyway,
The music
Go.
of Zork does
the
fascinate
music of
me.
Zork, yeah.
All right, we have an 8-question format here, and the first one isn't actually about our topic. It's just a simple question of what have you been listening to. Josh, go ahead.
All right, so music-wise, I'm actually pretty lame right now. I don't listen to a lot of music recently. So strangely, I've been listening to a lot of Billy Joel recently. This is a terrifying reality.
Okay.
In my 30s that I've started re-listening to Billy Joel. So I'm gonna put that aside and say that the two things that I've been listening to the most are not music. One is A Feast for Crows. I've been listening to the audiobook of that.
You know, I've never considered using this section for audiobooks. That's genius.
So yes, this is I'm sort of free form painting here. So I've been listening to that, and also Night Vale.
Is
Walking
that
on Night Vale.
second book?
It is, I think, the third,
I just finished the
possibly
first.
fourth.
Yeah, just finished never read or listened to any of the books until starting like a few weeks ago, and I've really been enjoying it so far.
It's actually, I think it's the fourth, because we just got some weird Comcast deal where they give us free HBO
Yep.
downloadable TV shows.
Yeah, okay.
So I watched the first 2 seasons, finished the third book, and then started the third season on TV and went, nope, they're combining the third and fourth book here. They're doing stuff that I don't even know about yet.
So you want to be ahead in the book.
I want to be ahead in the book because it's like the whole, like, if you don't know what the Red Wedding is, then the Red Wedding doesn't mean anything. But it's way better to read about the Red Wedding and then see it than it is to see it and then read about it, in my opinion.
I am of that opinion, too. I tend to always like to read before I see, because if you see, it defines what it's going to be in your head when you read it, among other things. And a podcaster for another podcast has been yelling at me for that opinion, insisting I watch the TV show first.
I will say, even if you do it this way, so Roy Detrice does the audiobook stuff, and he's amazing.
He is.
Although, disappointingly, in the fourth book, he mispronounces everybody's name and he gets everybody's voice wrong.
What?
I don't know. I think this is like a well-known problem with the audiobook of the fourth one. He just, like, for the first 3 books, he did really amazing voices and pronounced everybody's name. I mean, he consistently just pronounces everybody's name wrong. It's like he took a sheet that said, like, had all of his old notes about how he pronounced names and just crossed everyone off and repronounced it.
He was probably just bored at that point.
It's possible.
Okay.
I mean, each one of these is like 30 hours long. So,
Gotcha.
So he's been doing like 180 hours of this.
You know what would be awesome is if in honor of this podcast and to live up to the name of A Song of Ice and Fire, if he sang the 5th book.
I don't know if I could do that for 33 hours.
Someone needs to go through all the audiobooks and auto-tune it so that he's singing.
Oh, that just makes me hurt inside. No.
All right, fine.
So even though I'm listening to Roy Dotrice do the books before I see the show, Tyrion Lannister and Arya Stark have become the actors in the show for me. Like,
well, they're my favorite characters in the book, so I can see them pretty much. So I can see them carrying the show as well.
Right, and I mean, so everybody else kind of, Cersei is a little bit, sometimes I think about her as Cersei, but most of all, like, Tyrion and Arya, their faces have just become the book. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I've been listening to a lot of that, and then I've been listening to Welcome to Night Vale, which is an astounding little strange Lovecraftian podcast.
I have heard.
Interesting. I have heard of that. Yeah.
It's all it's all just a news report format. They're like 20 minutes long or so, and it's just news reports from this little town out in Arizona called Night Vale. And the news reporter basically just tells you all of the weird Lovecraftian kind of things that are going on in that town.
Is it fictional entirely? Is it based on, like, hearsay or, like, what?
Yeah, it's all fictional except, like, sometimes they'll have a sponsorship from a real-world product, but the commercial leading up to it is some sort of nightmare dreamscape description of, like, you're dreaming that you're in your own hometown and you know every house is a house, but it's actually a giant round black obelisk and they're all the same with no features, and then at the end it's like an ad for Target. You know, like
right.
It's I'm kind of surprised I haven't really looked this up yet, because I'm so interested in seeing people do more creative, fiction-driven, weird stuff with audio. You know, because video is such a popular component right now. I really like the art of audio. Obviously, I'm kind of trying to run a podcast network.
Right.
So it's really cool to hear people do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been, as I have been preparing for a project of my own, people suggested go listen to Night Vale. I'm really glad they did. It's pretty amazing.
All right, then. Kevin, what have you been listening to?
Yeah. So I've actually got an obsession with this Canadian band called Walk Off the Earth.
Okay.
And they're famous for that YouTube video from a few years back where they did a cover of Somebody I Used to Know, all playing one single guitar.
Yeah, they're super good.
I've never seen it.
Yeah, they're really good, and it's almost a shame that that's their most well-known thing, because they're actually incredibly talented, and I'm sort of sad that they won't be playing in California anytime soon, and in fact, not even in the United States anytime soon.
I can't see that I got red hands and color pipes and gay, oh. Don't put the blame on me, child. The damn thing gone wild. Hey, oh. Never wanted to be fooling you. Can't believe I was fooling you. Is that what you really?
So I've been sort of fascinated with listening to them, and on the side, just a bunch of Sibelius here and there. A composer I have a terrible obsession with, and various classical music like that.
Is that kind of like, do you tend to like always have some classical going on in your station?
There's always something. It sort of depends on what I'm in the mood for, but lately I've been trying to discover symphonies that aren't really well known, from major composers. And so, like, everybody, like, when it comes to certain symphonies, like the Tchaikovsky symphonies and Sibelius and whatever, they're always the symphonies that people know, and that are popular to play, and then there are always the symphonies that people don't know. And so it's that stuff that I'm most interested in lately, because I know all that other stuff now. I'm more interested in discovering class, kind of the classics that we never think about.
So what like Beethoven's Eighth Symphony?
Yeah, that's actually a lovely symphony too. It's probably his most lighthearted symphony, is his Eighth Symphony. Nobody ever talks about the Second Symphony, Beethoven's Second.
Yeah, it's like Dr. Wily's Stage 3 and Mega Man 2. It's like, no one's going to remember
Exactly. Nobody remembers, except for the Sixth Symphony. People rarely talk about Beethoven's even-numbered symphonies.
That you should write an essay on that. I think that has a lot of meaning to it.
So are you saying basically Beethoven's symphonies are like the Star Trek movies?
Why, yes. You can quote me on that.
There you go. All right, you have your thesis statement at least.
I'm excited.
But, this is reminding me. Another guest we had on the podcast was trying to give me recommendations on where to start with classical music and sort of that whole realm. And he was recommending the planets because he said, I think that this will work for you because it will trick you into thinking you like it. I'm trying to remember who originally composed that.
That's Holst, Gustav Holst.
Holst, yes. There you go. So would you concur with this, or would you say no, go somewhere else to ease yourself in?
No. And the reason is I want to be introduced to pop music. What is the first thing that you would recommend? It's probably not Miley Cyrus.
Okay.
And I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way. I'm just saying that Holst, the Planets, is it's sort of like telling people to listen to the Nutcracker the first time or something. It's just sort of like, it's
the thing.
It's like the pop music of classical music.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
as mainstream as you can get.
Right. It's so easy and mainstream that I would actually recommend maybe something that's listenable in a musical language that most of us can relate to, but maybe isn't quite so obvious.
So
that's fair enough.
Where do you typically listen to your classical music? Like, do you use a service like Spotify? Do you own what you listen to? YouTube?
All of that, yeah.
Okay.
It sort of depends. I like Spotify a lot.
Yeah, me too.
But I tend to want to reward, artists for their stuff. And I'm not always necessarily convinced that listening to things on Spotify is actually getting any reward to the artist.
I agree. I typically use Spotify for discovery, and then something like Bandcamp or Amazon or iTunes to support what I really enjoy from Spotify. So.
I mean, there was a time when it was all coming from the Zune store, so I had the Zune Pass. Which
you and your Windows phone and your Zune.
I know, right? They don't even call it Zune anymore. They call it Xbox Music. It's all
okay.
Same now.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, I mean, typically that stuff comes from those places.
Yeah.
I love lots of classical music. I mean, I majored in violin and musical composition, so lots of love there.
That's great.
Steven,
I feel like.
Can I jump in again real quick? Because listening to all of this has reminded me that I have listened to other music.
There you go.
I actually downloaded and listened to Spotify for the first time on July 5th when we were barbecuing.
Oh, excellent.
And I want to give a shout out to Tazwell, because I listened to his super ultimate summer jams list. Ryan Davis 3 days after the anniversary. Yeah. So, that was the first time I ever listened to Justin Bieber. I had gotten that far in life.
Oh wow, yeah.
Without ever hearing a Justin Bieber song.
I've gotten pretty far too, but it happens to everyone.
And then the other band that I've been listening to is Tao and the Get Down, Stay Down. I don't know if you guys know them or not.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
They're a really cool funk. I don't even know how to describe their sound, but they're really amazing. I heard them first on NPR years ago and saw them in concert last year, and they are freaking amazing. So Tao and the Get Down, Stay Down, very cool funk music.
Wow. I don't know about you, but I get almost all of my music recommendations from NPR.
That's where you go for the hippest sound, for sure.
Shockingly.
That's cool, though.
I have gotten a number of artists from NPR.
That is right. So, Steven.
Shovel Knight.
I guess it's only been a few days.
I've just been repeating both of the albums, the arranged album. But I have something new to say because I hadn't really listened to much of the arranged album last time.
Okay.
And there is a vocal song in here by Jake Kaufman called Hyper Camelot. And it is probably the most noble, perfect song in the world.
Hyper Camelot, fighting with all they've got. Hyper Camelot, riding to danger, evil beware. Our powerful horses carry us there.
it had me, like, I was driving and in danger of hurting myself or others because I was laughing very hard through the whole thing. It's just a real testament to how extremely creative and talented Jake Kaufman and most of the people he actually got to help him with the arrangement album are. I just think it must be crazy to write music for this Mega Man tribute, and then have, for one of your arrangements, what's her name? It's on the tip of my tongue. Who did Mega Man 1? Manami Matsume cover your song in your arrangement album.
Oh, yeah.
It would just be nuts. So yeah, I think one of the things that's really bringing me back over and over again to Shovel Knight is that it legitimately feels like one of those soundtracks that is going to be remixed dozens of times in the future. Mm-hmm. It just has that quality. It's really, really impressive.
Yeah, I have still yet to play it and still yet to hear it. Josh or Kevin, have you guys done anything with Shovel Knight yet?
Not at all. Nope.
Okay, Steven, sorry, you're still the sole representative of Shovel Knight on our podcast, but I swear I'll get to it.
Okay. Just hurry up, because I need to talk to someone about it. But I will say this. Don't you love it when you find one of those soundtracks that actually becomes better the more you listen to it, rather than getting tired of it or finding flaws in it, nitpicking
yeah,
as you go?
that's always a key, like, a key telling indicator with the soundtrack, you know. The second, third, fifth listen, what do you think about it?
Even if it doesn't blow you away the first time, I really feel like this is the kind of music that's so well constructed that you will learn to appreciate it more as you hear more of the intricacies.
Right.
Which is cool.
That's great. That is super cool. Has it just still been Shovel Knight for you?
I mean, I've also been listening to a Game of Thrones.
Oh gosh, we can't let this be audiobooks every time. It's going to take forever.
But yeah, I like it too. I guess that's all I'll say. It's really good. I've also been listening to more Radio Sega.
Yeah, okay.
Which is that really cool fan collaboration that has grown very popular over the years, that just cycles through all of the Sega music in existence on the internet. You can put in requests and stuff.
So, on Josh's sake, is there Yakuza music in there?
Oh,
Yakuza music is...
I'm literally sitting here thinking to myself, you know what? Just don't say anything about Yakuza.
Yes, I can read the minds of our panelists
at
some point.
I've heard 4 Yakuza songs come up so far, so...
Okay, very cool.
There you go. That's pretty fun. Unfortunately, I think I ruined everyone's time when I specifically requested Central City from Sonic RPG.
Why did you do that? Why did you do that?
Because I thought it would be funny.
That's the worst.
And then I realized that it popped up Train Station at 8 has requested. And I'm like, oh no, I've ruined our reputation.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man, I'm sure you guys haven't randomly heard Central City from the Sonic Dark Chronicles or whatever for the DS. It's possibly the worst video game song in the last 10 or 20 years.
The last interaction I had with Sonic was on the Genesis.
Really?
Yeah, I have not touched Sonic since I played the first Sonic game, and I went, this is all I need.
Oh, the first on the Genesis.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a little sad to me, I guess, but you've saved yourself a lot of adventures and pain.
Yeah, that's what I hear. I mean,
it's ups and downs for sure.
Like, evaluating my choice over the years, it looks like I'm in the plus.
Although I personally subscribe to the belief that it is better to have loved and lost Sonic than to have never loved Sonic at all.
No, but that's what I did.
But you didn't experience true loss. I mean, like, you experienced kind of like distancing yourself from an old friend. I've experienced the death of a loved one repeatedly.
I mean, that's fair.
The death and forceful resurrection of a loved one.
Necromancy, the cruelest sort.
So Sonic is the Khal Drogo of...
Hey! Spoilers, I said I finished the first book, so
Doesn't that happen in the first book?
I said over and over again, so potential spoilers. But yes, that's a very good comparison, by the way. Just let him die. Even I am in that camp at this point, so it's taken me a while. All right then, for what I've been listening to, as I mentioned on the last train station, weirdly enough, I'm listening to like a lot of punk music, which is not typical for me.
Still on the punk?
Yeah, a lot of like Spotify from like Tony Hawk soundtrack kind of stuff, which is punk inspired. I don't know how like true punk it is. I don't know the genre enough to know its like roots, but stuff like some Goldfinger, Green Day. What was the other one? One that's funk and not really punk, but will come up on the playlists is Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Sure.
You don't like
that? Is not punk.
Exactly. I said it comes up on the playlist.
Yeah, that's weird.
It is. Yeah, it's more funk, more rock. But apparently it thinks it sounds like Tony Hawk stuff. So
I guess I've only heard a few of their songs, but I really disliked them.
What do you dislike about them?
I remember them being very grating and repetitive or something. It's been years.
Yeah.
Can I ask at what point were you guys born?
At what point was I born?
Yeah,
like are you asking how old I am?
Yeah, that's more. But that means I have to do math. I'm asking for
1993.
Well, I'll give
1993. Yeah. Okay.
Wait, that's when you were born?
Yeah. Yes, I am 20.
Well,
okay.
Kevin,
I was born in 78, so I lived through the Chili Peppers as they were coming up. And
I've heard one song from them before. No,
wow.
A remix of one song. I never heard anything from them.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, there you go. I heard it in SSX 3. There was a remix of a Chili Pepper song, I believe.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I have been enjoying quite a bit of the stuff I've heard from them. I can totally get your complaint of it, Stephen. On the other hand, I can get that complaint for a lot of the stuff I've been listening to recently.
I mean, I think you can't go objectively trying to tell people that with that sort of music, I feel like that style is just...
I don't relate with it, and I don't know
abrasive.
it well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not something I know well enough to really judge, but I'm enjoying a lot of it. I mean, as for why, I really enjoy the, kind of guitar melodies they do in the background. They're often a little bit offbeat, but have this kind of cyclical sound to them that I really enjoy. The singer's good. He can get a little bit grating at times, but I guess I've just been really enjoying offbeat sounding music lately, and they've been delivering that in a lot of different ways. So great. That's been fun.
It's nice to just hear something completely different.
Yeah.
Than what we usually listen to. Unlike me, where I just keep saying, Shovel Knight, Sega, Shovel Knight.
Exactly.
Have you gentlemen, opened the catalog of early 90s grunge music?
What would you define as early 90s grunge? You mean Nirvana?
Pearl Jam, Nirvana,
some of that
Stone Temple Pilots?
Too.
Okay.
And yes, I've been listening to a little bit of Nirvana and some Pearl Jam. What do you think of it?
I mean, that's the high school music for me. So that's when you see, referencing this stuff, it's I started high school the year you were born.
That's so crazy. That's so weird.
This is all this is the music of my youth. So it's very interesting to hear somebody who is completely removed from it.
Yeah.
Evaluating it. That's exactly. Fascinating to me.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit of them. I do enjoy it. It has a lot of moodiness and atmosphere to it. Sometimes it can get a little bit, I don't know quite how to describe it. I can almost say grungy, but that's, what would you say? That is redundant. Sometimes it can feel a little bit
of a tautology, yeah.
I've noticed, Brian, that this music you've been listening to is just a little on the music-y side for me.
I know, it's just all musical. It's crazy. Yeah, I mean, I think it can just feel a little bit closed and, depressing in a not necessarily,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but
absolutely.
I know it's depressing. But I'm saying it's not necessarily a style of depressing music or sadness that I enjoy as much as others. So then it can feel a little bit,
that is fair.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people who grew up with that music still listen to it. I haven't listened to it.
I've actually meant specifically to listen through all of Nirvana's works just because they had such a short catalog that it would be very doable. And so thought it would be really interesting just to hear everything they'd put out so I can really have a knowledge base of what Nirvana was. But I've only heard a few songs as of this point. So
they're one of the interesting bands that they were grunge. They were known for a really distortion-based sound. And then their Unplugged album is incredible.
That's interesting. So when they went away from what their defined style was.
I mean, MTV, which used to stand for Music Television, used to do Unplugged. I don't know if they still do this or not, but they would, sit people down, do Unplugged whole sets, and they would record those as albums, and it was a big deal back in the day. And Nirvana did one for them, and it was really amazing. And the standout track from it is a cover of David Bowie's "The Man Who Sold the World."
I have not heard that. I probably should.
Pretty great, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, yep. The other one that's been coming up consistently in my list is because they're just so popular, I think, is Green Day, and I actually enjoy quite a bit of stuff from them. They have a very the interesting thing about punk music and grunge music. I don't know if the themes are necessarily the same, but both of them deal, very much in depression, very much in desperate youth sort of thing. But one of them does it by being kind of blindly happy, and the other does it by being very sad and melancholy. So it's really interesting to hear the similar themes handled in completely different ways.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because punk music is just all out, let's be crazy, but really their lyrics are about fairly depressing things.
Right.
So it's been interesting. Yeah, Green Day I've been enjoying the musical styles of. But let's move on here to something very different from punk music. With question number 2. What is your history with the Elder Scrolls?
You're going to have to call someone out, Brian, because we don't want to be rude and talk over each other.
All right, fine. Yeah, that's a good point, though. Kevin, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, God. Yeah, so my first Elder Scrolls game, I didn't start at the beginning. Mm-hmm. I started later. Morrowind was my first Elder Scrolls game. Afterwards, I went back and played Daggerfall. I played Arena, which I glad I guess I'm glad I have that in my memory somewhere.
I've gotten through the first dungeon of Arena, and that's my opinion too.
So most people don't like Arena. I remember almost nothing about it, so that's probably a good thing based on the things I know. But Morrowind was my first real Elder Scrolls experience. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, it's grown from there, and I've had pretty much all of the Elder Scrolls since then.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So.
I think that Morrowind is probably the most classic example of the jumping off point for Elder Scrolls. But each installment has become the de facto Elder Scrolls experience for more and more people. It's when Oblivion came out, it's just it exploded and became a mainstream kind of thing.
They become progressively more welcoming with each game.
Well, yes, that's true. And Skyrim became this monster. You just couldn't get away from it for years.
I think you guys are you're telling a version of the Elder Scrolls story that completely ignores Redguard and the Elder Scrolls adventures that are these non-welcoming, Redguard came out after Morrowind. It was not a progressively better the Elder Scrolls adventures.
I think the Elder Scrolls wants to tell the story that ignores.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No one wants to talk.
You're just towing the corporate line, man.
There's just sends us a check every time we mention Elder Scrolls and don't mention Redguard. You just stole my lunch money. Gosh.
Well, Brian. The moments before we started this podcast, Brian was saying, hey, so have you caught up on any Arena music to talk about during the podcast? And I'm like, a what? Oh, that exists. I had forgotten that there were any more Elder Scrolls games than 3, 4, and 5.
Right, so we can cover it briefly. Steven.
Except for the fact that they had the numbers 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
It doesn't even register with me anymore. It's like the people who pretend 4, 5, and 6 are all that all
exactly. I was going to draw the same comparison. Yep.
I think those are different things. There was a long time when only 4, 5, and 6 existed.
But were they called? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there was a retcon when Empire came out. 4 was renamed 4.
Yeah, admitted.
Yeah, admittedly. Our history was starting with Morrowind, and then moving to Oblivion, and then Skyrim, and I've also gone back when they released Daggerfall and Arena for free. I have played both of those very briefly, but not enough to really get into it.
I really gave Arena a shot. I was playing it for a couple of good solid hours. Well, middling solid hours.
For an Elder Scrolls game, that's a real shot. 2 hours, that'll get you pretty far. No, I know it's tough. Just I'm not typically one to say a game ages badly and not play it because of that. I tend to like to go back to old games even when they're kind of obtuse. That said, Arena ages badly. and I cannot really go back to that very well.
Yeah, it's really tough. It has a lot of, especially, well, what's the next one called? I just forgot. Daggerfall, yeah. That has a lot of fascinating ideas in it.
Yeah.
But it's just almost impenetrable.
So, and Redguard, Elder Scrolls Adventures didn't even touch those. Morrowind was the first.
Yeah. Those are spin-offs, really. Yeah. So,
what about you, Josh?
So I started with Morrowind, I mean, pretty much like everybody did. I own a copy of Redguard, and I have played about 10 minutes of it. And even at the time, it was mildly impenetrable. And then I moved on to Oblivion. Did not like Oblivion. I'm in the camp that loves Morrowind, doesn't like Oblivion, and thinks Skyrim is great because it's a lot like Morrowind.
Yeah, that is 100% my position.
Yep.
That's great.
And so I had to do a lot of research on the Elder Scrolls recently.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know the adventures existed. So I had Redguard, I knew that existed, but I didn't even know the adventures existed. I've never touched them. And I did go back. What's that?
Battlespire?
Yeah, Battlespire. Yeah, exactly.
I have heard of that.
I did go back to play the first 10 minutes or so of Arena, so I played even less of Arena and found it so obtuse that, like, just movement in that game, I found... my curiosity was sated when I was really glad to be able to see that the opening of the game and the history of the game, and I was like, wow, all of this stuff was already here. Walking into the first game, you have the whole history, you have Tiber Septim, you've got a prisoner at the beginning of the game. So all that, it was really cool to kind of take a quick walk down that path and go like, oh, okay, this has been going on for a long time. But I could not. But I've played Morrowind through a couple of times, and still to this day, there are specifically 2 or 3 moments in Morrowind that still stand out in my top 10 moments of gaming.
I would probably say the same thing. It's an incredible game because it feels like it truly is yours. It's like this is... No one else had this experience, unless maybe your experience was dying from the worm out front of Satanin. Other than that, no one has had this experience.
Trying to stab it with a rusty sword and saying, "Why won't it hit?"
Right. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. But other than that, it's a game that felt like it truly allowed you to make your own path, and it kind of did that by allowing you to make your own path and thus breaking it frequently. But it was okay.
And I mean, the Dwemer Ruins. I mean, looking back, nothing stands out to me more environment-wise than the Dwemer Ruins.
I agree. I mean, kind of. Oh, go ahead, Josh. Oh, now we're doing the Skype thing.
I'll just go ahead, but I don't have anything to say.
Brian, just break this up.
Josh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, even though I liked that Skyrim had Dwemer Ruins, I still think the Morrowind Ruins were better.
They had a bigger sense of a lost civilization.
Yeah,
that you
absolutely.
Were finding. Also, like Skyrim felt like it's a dungeon with a flavor.
Yep.
Like just the sound of it. It was like this cavernous, empty world. You hear these, those really harsh. Nothing else. There's almost like no wind sounds or anything. Just these crankings and these metallic shattering sounds. Like, wow, what's going on back there? Like this, like almost like this whole city used to be buzzing and whirring at some point, but now everything's stuck, filled with sand and dirt and whatnot.
And there was something about the way the Dwemer Ruins appeared in the general landscape of Morrowind that was much more intriguing than the way they did it in Skyrim. So you would kind of go out there and there would be these domes sticking out and broken and sort of sky walkways broken in half, and I think they did stuff like that in Skyrim, but for some reason it just didn't evoke the same sort of melancholy or need to investigate, I guess, that they had in Morrowind.
Yeah, I agree. So I think the one problem I had with Morrowind Dwemer Ruins, which just systematically how the game worked, is it didn't change the music when you went in there. So you could be exploring them and be playing the same music that plays when you're like in the town. or doing anything else. And Skyrim luckily did address that, but it was just always one of the most unnatural places to hear the music because it was so atmospheric otherwise.
So it seems kind of like Brian and Josh, you have the same opinion as I do, where Morrowind was brilliant, Oblivion made a million missteps, and then Skyrim sort of redeemed the story.
But we can't get into anything older.
And everything else is kind of like ancient history, fascinating, but not applicable.
Precisely.
But Kevin, did you continue through Oblivion and Skyrim with similar feelings, or what?
So, it's funny. Like, this is one of those cases where I feel like my appreciation, like my ability to say this is good versus this is my favorite, are kind of separate. Mm-hmm. So it's very hard to kind of explain this, but. Mm-hmm. I love Morrowind, even though I don't actually believe it's the best game in the series of the three. Yep. For a lot of the reasons that you're discussing, I actually appreciate Oblivion from a certain perspective because I think they tried very hard to fix a lot of the things that were just really tedious and as a PC gamer, I've come to love over the years all things that are tedious.
Inventory systems.
I'll be the first to say that we PC gamers have a very hard time separating separating things that are obtuse from things that are deep.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes it's actually quite infuriating. To me, that it's like, oh, this game's deep because you have to spend 7 hours in the inventory system to make sense of it. It's like, that's not deep, that's just dumb.
Right.
But there, I honestly, I do think that part of Morrowind's, the interest I had in Morrowind was, number one, like, how I had to explore everything and I just couldn't click on buttons to go around. I mean, it's easy to say, hey, that's tedious, but it also means that I got to know the world really, really well as I moved through it.
Right.
It's
That's
sort
so
of
true.
It's sort of like the Dark Souls thing. It's like after a while you move through some of the same spaces, you get to really understand it, like places you actually live.
No, I totally agree. Like an example for that for me in Morrowind is I used like a bowcaster to fight the whole time. And sometimes bolts could be kind of hard to find because you didn't have unlimited ammo. You had to buy specifically bolts and not arrows, and then you wanted specific qualities of bolts. So there was this one fort I knew of that replenished them often, so I knew the walk to that specific fort, and the seller who sold those bolts, yes, exactly, really well. Right. Which is a connection I had to the game that is mine and memorable in a way that something like Oblivion and other games aren't quite as much. So I can see how that helps.
Yes. I mean, Oblivion, I have moments. I mean, it's funny because I never actually finished the story in Oblivion.
Same.
Oh, neither did I.
I stopped caring so early into the game about what was going on and why I was there. But I mean, I still have those few moments I think that a lot of people do. Like the moment you come out of the dungeon in the first, in the first short while, and you're oh wow, look at this. I can't wait to go out there. But the memories I have in the series are all, like if I think, oh, what are some of my favorite Elder Scrolls moments? They all come from Morrowind and Skyrim.
Yep.
Particularly Morrowind, I think that the first time I got stuck in a dust storm, like as I was moving through the world, is one of those iconic moments in my memory from games. I mean, like you were talking about the Dwemer Ruins before, like that first time, there's suddenly a storm, and I'm like, what do I do? Where do I go? I actually felt like I was out there in the damn storm, and seeking shelter. And then of course you go in, some dungeon entrance that's nearby, and you're like crushed by the first skeleton that you stumble upon, and
I remember just being. Having those moments where we're low on health and we have no stamina left, and Brian's like, let's just go hide in that cave. And I'm like, no, you know it's in caves. Everything bad is in caves. I'm not going in there. Just having those arguments. So that was great.
Yep.
Well,
everything is bad in caves.
The best thing, I guess it's not really a cave. I guess it's an underground. I mean, it's an underground cave. The best thing in Morrowind is in a cave, and it's in the Corpus Caves.
Wait, the Corpus Caves are where?
Yeah, the Corpus colony that's in a cave under, I forget what town it is. But you go in there and there's, you have to get Corpus at a particular point, and you go down and you visit the colony, and there's a character in there who, I don't know, might be my top 3 experiences of video games. Do you guys remember who's down there?
I've never been there.
I don't think we ever got there.
You have had to, because you had to get Corpus, and then you had to do...
We never beat the game, if that helps.
What's that?
We never beat the game, if that's what you mean.
Yeah. No, that helps. So, the last Dwemer is down there.
See, by saying just the Corpus thing, it didn't cross my mind.
Right.
So there's a living Dwemer.
There is a living Dwemer.
The last living Dwemer.
Yes.
We got to get back to Morrowind, Brian. We got to find that.
Also the last Airbender?
We've been looking for that stinking Dwemer for 50 hours.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. We probably should have actually gone on with the main story, apparently.
I guess so.
That is so
the main
cool.
story, it was actually the thing that produced the two. When you had to go and get sort of the tribesmen's assistance, that's the other one. They have catacombs where they kind of buried bodies, and if you go all the way in the back of the catacombs and you kind of decide after you've completed what you need to do, if you're just like, well, I'm just going to explore some more, and you climb to the top of the catacombs there are bodies just laid in these sort of cut out, I can't think of what they're called, like little alcoves, I guess, where you would bury people. And there are some really amazing magical items up there. But you would there's no reason to go up there unless you're just curious. But you get there by the main story. So yeah, I mean, that's what was so disappointing to me about Oblivion was I gave up on the main story very early because I just didn't care.
Yeah. Everything in Oblivion felt very self-contained. It didn't really feel like it had a lot of broader implications on the world at large like Morrowind did.
I mean, kind of to sum those two. I guess we should probably talk about music.
Yeah, exactly.
But I just trying to sum those two games up. Morrowind has a terrible first impression, but gets better and deeper and more magical as you play. Oblivion had a really fantastic first impression with all of its new technologies and horizons, but the more time passes and the more you play it, the more its flaws become apparent.
Yeah, like it's AI system. You're like, this is cool. They're talking about mud crabs. And then it's like, oh my gosh, they're talking about mud crabs.
Stop.
but in spite of that, I look back and I think, okay, so besides the dungeon and then emerging out of it in Oblivion, what else do you remember about your first 2 hours? What do you remember?
Patrick Stewart.
I remember running across a guy who asked me to bring him 10 slaughterfish scales and saying, oh my gosh, they have MMO quest design.
Fish dude is the first thing I remember. And,
me too. Then I remember a lady saying, can you bring me wine? I want 10 casks of wine. And I'm like, what is with these quests? I thought the Elder Scrolls had compelling quests.
But you know what? In Morrowind, you know what? It was impenetrable, but I remember the things. I remember.
Yeah. I got lost in the second city. Yep.
And the first travel bug up above you, and you're like, what the fuck is that?
Yep.
And
and having to watch the guy at night walk over to the tree and put the thing inside the tree, in that first town.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all that just stays with me.
I think
the guy falling from the sky and smashing in front of you.
Yes.
That sent us on a
freaked
quest
Brian out
to reenact that spell in a way that wouldn't kill us, and that's lasted us throughout the entire game. It's amazing.
That's the story. We need to talk about that sometime when
we have more time. But let's talk about the music now.
Okay.
Question number 3, and these will hopefully go quicker now. What do you like about Elder Scrolls music, Steven?
I think what I like about Elder Scrolls music is it has the rare quality of never becoming tiresome, regardless of how many hours, and it must be hundreds at this point that I've heard it. Every single time it relaxes me and makes me want to explore at the same time.
That's a very good reason. What about you, Kevin?
Well, the reason I like it is because it's archetypal. It's or archetypical, I guess, if I wanted to be proper. Which one is right? Archetypal, archetypical? Anyway, I'm a writer. I should know this stuff.
Yeah, we're kind of looking at you.
But the reason I think I like it is because it more or less fits with the world itself, which in and of itself is very archetypical, whatever I want to call it. So, in any case, there is probably no better example of all of the high fantasy things all thrown into one place in games than Elder Scrolls.
Yeah.
And maybe EverQuest also sort of comes to mind because I actually think that Norath and Tamriel are very similar.
World of Warcraft throws a lot of elements in, but they draw from more than just fantasy, so it doesn't feel as like pure fantasy as Elder Scrolls.
Yeah, Warcraft is sort of like more of that Warhammer kind of
a comic book version of it.
Yeah, steampunk and comic book and that sort of thing. So,
but like as far as like all of the real high fantasy things in one place, that's what Elder Scrolls is. Every kind of trope that you think about is in there somewhere. And that's not to say that it's cliche. I'm not trying to say that, but I would use the word trope in the sense that it pretty much is in video games sort of what all high fantasy sort of compares to in my mind in a way.
That's kind of interesting that you say that because I feel like and each game hones in on one part of Tamriel. So like in Skyrim, you have this very harsh, male choir-dominated, almost kind of Celtic feel to it. Very rustic. In Oblivion, it's all about your very classical, almost King Arthur rolling European hills, sort of lovely sunlight tracks. In Morrowind, I feel like that is the hardest to pin down, though. Like, what is that style of music? What is that world they're trying to bring to life?
It's fantasy Dune.
It is. It's a little bit of like the more general idea of what we think of in the West as tribal or exotic. Is a lot of that, and that comes across in the music, and part of that's why I guess we'll get to this, why I think Morrowind soundtrack is the best of the three. But I mean, the reason I like the music in general in the series is because I think that it is archetypal fantasy music in an archetypal fantasy world. And therefore fits. I would probably argue against it not being repetitive for me. Especially in Morrowind, upon which was the least amount of music on that disc of all of the three. It's like, okay, I've had enough.
I think the problem
I'm going to turn you down now.
I think another problem with Morrowind is that they played the very melodic and short theme song in the game.
Oh yeah,
repeatedly, And
I mean,
love
it brought me some incredible moments, but also it kind of felt like, oh, the theme song's looping again.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it is one of my favorite video game songs of all time, but it doesn't necessarily fit to play that minute-and-a-half song every 30 minutes.
It would be sort of like if you were riding Epona around on Hyrule Field and the title screen started to play from Ocarina of Time.
Well, no, like, it would more feel like you're in the middle of the Fire Temple and the title screen from Ocarina of Time starts playing.
Good point.
See, and that's always my little issue with the sort of how Bethesda handles soundtracks anyway. My issues are never really with the soundtracks themselves. Jeremy Soule is a fine composer, and as are all. He's fine. I'm not Jeremy Soule's biggest fan. I think his best work was in Icewind Dale, which was a long time ago. But nevertheless, my issue is never really with the music itself. It's always with sort of how Bethesda uses it and mixes it in.
I think Skyrim did a really good job.
Oh, for sure, the best of the three when it comes to musical mixing.
Like, it had a bunch of atmospheric tracks it would play, and then different stuff for dungeons and towns and that sort of thing. So.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, but
I definitely get the complaint.
Yeah, I do sometimes have issues. I mean, this isn't the Fallout podcast, so I guess I shouldn't get
It reminds me of something you've had a problem before, is when, like, people blame the game radio engine for the Elder Scrolls games being buggy.
Oh, those people need to shut up.
I know. It's like, that's a similar thing that, it's not the soundtrack's fault in Elder Scrolls games all the time.
Yeah, well,
it's how it's implemented.
It's like with voice acting in a lot of games. A lot of things that we look at the voice actors and accuse them of really don't have anything to do with... Like, it's very easy to complain about voice actors in Final Fantasy, but all of those stupid ways they talk, there's a voice director in there saying, okay, I want you to be even more annoying here.
And how the script is written, you can only go so far with it. And
Yeah, can you put more chirpy noises into this line? Okay. There's just not enough.
Yep.
So again, it's that Bethesda thing where it's like, and again, like Fallout 3, I have real issues with that soundtrack as a result of the way the music is mixed and doesn't. Thank God New Vegas did a much better job with it, but yeah. Anyway, back to Elder Scrolls.
Yeah. What about you, Josh? What do you like about it?
It's interesting. So I genuinely didn't give the music of the Elder Scrolls much thought before you emailed me about this. And so I kind of went back to Morrowind's soundtrack and then kind of just stayed there. I could not tell you right now what Oblivion's soundtrack sounds like. I'm sure if somebody played for me, some of the more prevalent pieces of music, I would go, oh, right, sure. And Skyrim, it took me thinking about you saying like, oh, well, it has that choral stuff, for all of that to be evoked again in my head, and I go, oh yeah, right, sure. I think as somebody who doesn't pay as much attention to music, and I have a good buddy Jim who, he can pick out a music track in a movie and go like, oh, well, that's from this other movie, and I'm like, really? Oh, okay, I had no idea. Listening to the Morrowind music outside of the context of Morrowind just brought me back to that world. And so there's this way in which, I think Kevin's right, it's very archetypal or archetypical. I should also know this.
No one knows.
But don't. There's a way in which it isn't just throwaway fantasy music, I guess. Video games are just chock full of throwaway fantasy music.
Oh, yes.
And I can say at least the Elder Scrolls has never been that for me. I'm also with you, Kevin, on the fact that after 40 hours of looping, main title theme in Morrowind, I also turned it down. But now, having some distance from it, hearing it again, I mean, I am hopping across that landscape again.
As your agility rapid racer above your head.
That's right. And I'm swinging my sword at it.
That's and how
then,
you go bowcaster.
And then hopping again on my way.
So you can level up your acrobatics.
That's exactly right. And then hopping my way towards, Vivek.
Oh, Vivek.
So
like I think that's the beauty of some of these. Oftentimes it tends to be RPGs, especially PC RPGs, that have this special atmosphere about them. Like for Brian and I'm sure that we would jump right to World of Warcraft, especially like the early stuff like Dune Moreau. For Kevin, like we talked about last time, Anarchy Online brings him right back to that game.
Yes.
And there's something real special about that era, especially, of really evocative ambient music that has a melody but doesn't smack you in the face with it.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It isn't, and maybe there's a point at which post Lord of the Rings, there's been a shift in fantasy music, because it seems like everything I hear has to be so big, and that's one of the things about Morrowind's music, is that it's epic while being kind of small.
Even its combat music has a drum beat to it, but it's just a couple horns and like yeah.
The Elder Scrolls, especially Morrowind, tends to be epic in an older sense of the word.
Mm-hmm.
It is sprawling, it is grand, but not exciting necessarily. In fact, Morrowind can be very boring.
Definitely took a step in that direction with its theme and its dragons and its even then it tried to root it in a specific, aesthetic. But yeah, I agree. The Elder Scrolls has always been like, even with its lore and everything, like if you look at like Warhammer lore or Dragon Age lore, there's a lot of just, make everything blow up at once, make gods come down, and make just ridiculous craziness happen in every game.
Most fantasy universes are obsessed with the wars they fought and are fighting. But in Elder Scrolls, they feel like real wars. Like, this happened at some point, but this book happens to be about the peoples that settled after the war. It's wow.
There's a real restraint, I think, to the Elder Scrolls. And so I was hanging out and talking about a year ago with Shane Leesgang, who worked for Bethesda, was one of the main writers on Skyrim, and now he works, I think he's over at Sega now. Or actually maybe Sony Santa Monica. I think that's where he is.
That makes way more sense.
Sorry. So we were hanging out and we were kind of just talking about the lore and stuff. And I said to him, it would be really great one day if we could just find out what happened to the Dwemer. And he said, I don't think we're ever going to reveal that. Like, I think it's always going to be a thing that we never say. And there's a restraint in what they do, and I think that that's reflected in the music, and that's why I think it sort of stands out.
I agree. There's a certain minimalism to it.
That's really interesting to me, because I guess restraint isn't one of the first words I think of when I think of Elder Scrolls, but I think you're right, but what worries me is that I always feel like they probably might reveal something really vital and interesting, and I'll miss it because it's buried in one of a trillion books somewhere.
Right. And that's the thing. I'm sorry to cut you off.
This is why you should pick up Josh's book.
Brian, plugs are at the end of the book.
Yeah, I was wondering how long we would get in before.
For me, Elder Scrolls has always been there isn't anything vital. What's vital is what I care about. Like, for example, in Skyrim, we played as a Dunmer, and got obsessed with researching our own culture. And it wasn't vital for the main story, but that's what was important to us. In Morrowind, we became obsessed with figuring out what happened to the Dwemer. I'm sure lots of people did.
Right.
And so we went down that path.
Slavery.
So I'm not really sure. Yeah, and we became abolitionists, essentially. And so I'm kind of curious of what you think is vital for Elder Scrolls. I feel like everyone sees something different as vital. The main stories very rarely actually interest me that much.
That's true. And I guess that might be one of my Elder Scrolls problems in the end, is that when it sort of reminds me of that great line from The Incredibles, when everybody is special, no one is, sort of line. And it's like one of the same things. If you tell all of the story, then none of it seems particularly special. And in the end, I always think of Elder Scrolls as the most important stories that are told are the ones that I make for myself, like the one in the sandstorm, like and finding shelter. It's like the game didn't tell that story.
Most of the games, exactly. Like most of the game's lore and story doesn't tend to be like as interesting on its own, like in something like Dragon Age, as much as it's providing texture to the world for you to create your own stories in. So.
I wonder what would happen. I'd be kind of curious to play an Elder Scrolls game that took a Dark Souls storytelling approach and didn't really feature a whole lot of written dialogue.
I would love that.
I would be terrified for the people at Bethesda, because the lore communities on the Bethesda forums are very enthusiastic.
Oh, no.
That's a very charitable and carefully worded phrase.
Well, I also have to, they're my people, so...
You are one of the forum posters.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so speaking of things we don't like about Elder Scrolls, I almost did a great transition if I could pronounce words. What do you not like about Elder Scrolls music?
Well, they can be archetypal archetypical.
Oh my gosh, Kevin, what do you not like?
I started something.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, Kevin, what do you not like about Elder Scrolls?
Oh, well, that's it. I mean, that really is it. I think that when you have music that is archetypical, then what you do is you also run the risk of it becoming very expected. And on one hand, I'm glad that Skyrim sort of broke some trend and did some interesting things in terms of like, icy environments, accompanied by icy soundtrack kind of thing. And so I'm glad that we got to have more variety in the Skyrim soundtrack than we had in the previous two games. On the other hand, there comes a moment when you realize that it's just sort of there. And, sometimes, when you have a big RPG, sometimes the music isn't necessarily fitting the exact thing that you're doing at any given time. I mean, anybody that's played an RPG will tell you that can happen. And I don't know, there's something to me that sometimes becomes a little bit cliche about those soundtracks. But that is, again, the nature of being sort of the, maybe I'll say prototypical now instead of archetypical, just to change things up.
Yeah.
In fact, I have looked this word up. Both are valid.
Are you sure?
Oh.
Yeah.
Fun time.
All right, everyone wins.
So there you go.
PhD weighing in on this, so we're good.
I like archetypical better because it's more fun to say.
It is more fun to say. But I agree with your point. I think a lot of the times Elder Scrolls the music does a pretty darn good job at reflecting the world, which is why I think Oblivion's does feel very archetypical, generic, kind of just bland, pastoral,
right.
medieval-ish, fantasy music. I really enjoy it. I think it's very well done for what that is, but the world of Oblivion is similarly very bland. Skyrim is very exciting and at times and very icy and desolate at other times, but on the other hand, it's kind of just generically.
It loses a little bit of the melody, I think, that the others had in favor of avoiding that repetitive problem.
And like the theme song is great, but it is just very bombastic, Nordic, barbarian kind of singing. Similarly, the world of Skyrim just kind of feels and it's a little generically just Nordic and not a lot of their own twists on top of that, except what they're borrowing from older games like the Dwemer, which is another reason I think Morrowind's soundtrack and the world are the strongest because they're kind of tied together again in that way, but I think both of them are the most original.
Right. It's always interesting for me to think about, okay, so aside from the main theme, which we all know, right? Like, let's just say that I played... No, that's not the one I was
Superman,
thinking of.
Right?
We can have another podcast about John Williams soundtrack.
Oh gosh, yes.
Which John Williams tune is this? I don't know. They
are in games a lot. So.
But there is that thing where it's like, okay, so if I just played you a random track, do you think you'd be able to actually identify that it came from Oblivion?
Yes.
Or Morrowind?
I listen to all of the soundtracks.
For me, yes, but I understand how other people might not.
Yeah,
right. Let's just say that you're somebody who hasn't played the game 16 times or something.
Okay.
Like, okay, say you played every single RPG one time or something.
Okay.
And I played you some music from, like, I don't know, any Jeremy Soule soundtrack or something, like, or Enon Zur or whoever, whatever fantasy composer.
If it's not like the main melody.
Right. Could you, is it iconic enough that you'd be able to pick it out? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but I think it's an interesting question to ask. And I think maybe that's my little issue with Elder Scrolls music is I don't know that if this Elder Scrolls track from Jeremy Soule next to this, I don't know, Baldur's track next to each other, are they really going to stand out to me as particularly having one flavor over another?
That's a question, a very discerning question that makes me defensive and angry. Because I want everyone here to say that Elder Scrolls music is the best. So I don't know why you guys are even here.
Can they kick Kevin? All right, yes.
Nobody.
I actually fully understand your point. I think that's just kind of the nature of fantasy music.
But does it have to be?
It doesn't have to be. No.
Right.
I would like to say
Elder Scrolls 5 and all J-pop soundtrack.
I would. I'm not going to comment on that, but I would like to think that Morrowind would stand out. But
I feel like tracks from Morrowind that definitely would.
Oh yes, very much so.
I think maybe it's just a very subtle soundtrack, though, right? Like, it might not have that much of an impression if you're playing like every game once, for example.
That's true.
You sort of have to listen to it over and over again to really.
But there are also, subtle soundtracks. Like I would take The Last of Us that also deliver something that you don't really see.
Yeah,
like it is immediately.
But I mean, like I don't know. Looking at it that way, I do think Morrowind. It doesn't really sound like anything else. Like no one composes those sorts of melancholy, beautiful, but very down to earth songs.
Kind of single horn as kind of a primary melodic tool. Yeah, but I think that the complaint Kevin brings up does apply a lot better to Oblivion and Sky.
Yes, like Oblivion is so well crafted. That music is just beautiful, but it's very just beautiful pastoral fantasy music. It's the best of its class, more or less, but that's what it is. That is super true.
So, Josh, is there anything you've not liked from what you've been your recent Elder Scrolls music research lately?
I mean, I guess I would mostly agree with everything that's been said. I will say that, kind of to that last question, when I did listen to the Morrowind soundtrack again recently a few times, I went back and as I heard different tracks, I went and I looked at the titles of them because I thought, I totally remember this track, even though it isn't the main theme. So there were things that were very explicitly familiar to me in the context of, but so I think the difficulty would be, like if you play Gears of War once, you're playing maybe 6 hours of a game, maybe 5 hours of a game.
Yep.
If you're playing through Morrowind once, you still one time could be 80 hours of listening to the same music.
Yeah.
And so I think that the way music works with our memory is it brings us to a place. So it's a little bit hard for me to say that if that you couldn't play a track from World of Warcraft for me and I wouldn't recognize it as World of Warcraft. Maybe 1 out of every 10 tracks I could do that with. But some of them definitely would, even if they weren't particularly outstanding. So I think there's more going on there than just like we hear some music in the background, because we are sort of subconsciously connecting that music with the things we're doing.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
But overall, I would say that I think it is the repetitiveness of it that, I mean, you have this balance, right? You either have a short soundtrack with very sort of standout songs, and then they end up getting repeated all the time and maybe not matching up with what you're doing, or you fall kind of into the Skyrim trap where you have a lot more. It's much more adaptive, but it's not particularly archetypal, which I'm going to go with that version of it.
I think there's also this part of, like, because we were talking before about the memories that we have, and I think part of it also has to do with the fact that the things that we hold on to, even if it's not the soundtrack, we're still going to remember all of the things involved in that moment. Like, what did it sound like when I saw that, when I saw that Silt Strider? I'm probably going to recognize that, even if the music itself isn't all that memorable by itself. We still associate it with those, with those iconic moments that occurred in gameplay and in the sights as well. And so that stuff all fits together. And I think that's part of the Oblivion problem too, is that we didn't really have many iconic memories from Oblivion, and so therefore the music just sort of, it's the same thing. There was nothing, in the game that really stood out, and so therefore we don't have any sounds associated with memories that don't exist, obviously.
One kind of interesting side note about the Oblivion soundtrack is the fact that I listened to it on 20 or 30 times before ever playing the game.
Interesting.
It was weird that I did that. It's what made me want to play the game. And this was, years ago. When did it come out? 2006? Probably around there.
Yes.
And so
it was like the year after the Xbox 360
came out. It was originally
came out.
a launch game, but then
what actually happened for me is I knew what the game was. We'd only played Morrowind at that point, and so I was imagining what Oblivion would be like. while listening to the soundtrack. I saw like these beautiful running streams that would connect down into the canals, and I knew there would be that imperial city, shooting into the sky, and I was like, oh, this is incredible. It's going to just, it will look so much better than Morrowind. And the game itself just let me down eventually. And so I hold that music in very, very high regard, but not because of the game. Right. Like, that was weird and reversed for me in that one case. Morrowind is the opposite, where everything's connected.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good point. Question number 5, and this is going to be on a little more positive note here. What's your favorite Elder Scrolls soundtrack? I mean...
Morrowind.
Yeah. Morrowind. Yes. Okay. I thought this question was pretty obvious. Yeah. Next question. Question number 6. How does Elder Scrolls music complement the gameplay and world, and how could it improve on this?
Hey, we've kind of already answered this.
Yeah. Sort of. That's often what happens at this wonderful world of Train Station at 8 is...
well, I'd like to mention a little more about Skyrim.
Sure.
Because I think that game made huge leaps towards taking away that goofy... always looping soundtrack that the other ones had. Like, Oblivion's big thing is there's dungeon music and there's everything else music.
Yeah.
And that really helped, but also made it feel terribly segmented because, like, here are the dungeons. They are dark and evil, filled with rats and spiders and
zombies.
Worms that got cut in half, when worms get cut in half.
And zombie rats.
And zombies. And then the above is sheep. And people talking about sheep. And, green pastures. It almost felt comical at that point. Skyrim bridged that gap with a much more elegance, I suppose. You couldn't just tell this is a dungeon song, this is a not dungeon song. Some of it was atmospheric. It would then shift into a few notes on like a lute or whatever it is they played. And then there would be your great soaring songs when you're on a mountain or something. That combined with having the bards play like in-game music for your entertainment, I think really made the music a part of the world when before it felt like it was overlaid onto the world, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I totally agree with that entire thing. Skyrim took huge leaps and bounds in terms of integrating it. But one thing I'm interested to discuss is, do we have any ideas of how it could do it better in future games?
So when I think about, like, the games where music has really stood out for me...
Don't say Guitar Hero.
No. I mean, it did. But
yeah, but just don't say it.
It is not the soundtrack, but the radio station in Fallout 3, much more than Fallout New Vegas, and the radio stations in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. And they used music and speech, and of course Fallout 3 and New Vegas had the repetition problem. But they both were able to utilize music in a way that was natural. You have this sort of world-building music that goes beyond just sound like ambient music. And there isn't an effective way to do that in fantasy.
You hire a personal minstrel.
Right. You basically have, the guy who follows around Sir Robin.
Yep. You can do that in Fable to some extent.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah. But that kind of, like, the ability to communicate the world through music by way of, I mean, like, maybe this sounds like a really terrible idea, but when you walk into an inn, hearing the tales of the land through music in a way that actually communicates, maybe even starts a quest, and and maybe even reflects something you did, that seems really interesting to me as a way to do that world building with the music that isn't just the sort of ambient music.
Yeah, that is an interesting point. I wouldn't necessarily want it to be Elder Scrolls, but it really would be interesting if there was an RPG where you didn't get any music unless you heard it in taverns, just like the people in that world. So go to the taverns to hear music, and then the rest of the world just be stark without any music. I don't think Elder Scrolls should do that just because they have such a good thing going with their music, but that is an interesting concept to me. And I love the idea of like putting it into the plots and a way to hear about the lore of the world and so on through the...
I mean, Skyrim definitely...
But it only had like 3
did
songs.
Some of that. Yeah. But I really liked how you would hear the same tune with different lyrics depending on what the supporter of the game was.
Right. Like whether it's
like there was the Age of Aggression and the Age of... What was like Age of... Can't remember now. But it kind of reminds me... Fallout 3 actually did this rather well. It didn't give you a full-on radio station like in Fallout or something, which to me, I haven't had a lot of experience with those, but sometimes I feel like they can be a little bit gimmicky, even though they do add a lot. But in Far Cry, if you got into a Jeep or something, you'd start up the vehicle, and then whatever the local radio station was would just start playing. And you could turn it off if you wanted to, but I thought that was a pretty cool way of letting music inform you about your environment while giving you something to listen to at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it felt more natural, like Sentence and Fallout, like it takes over very...
Right, it's just kind of like this background noise that's playing. Someone was clearly listening to this before they got out of their car, and then you stole it and drove it into a Panther or whatever.
Exactly. What do you think, Kevin? Do you have any ideas on how they can improve the kind of integration?
You're actually on to something with silence, but not quite all the way. I don't think anybody wants a silent game. I mean, that's been done before. I mean, there are lots of, there are games that go that route. But one of the first things you sort of learn as a composer is that rests are as important as notes. Mm-hmm. And I think that pacing the music better is an important part of that. And I think a lot of that would entail allowing the music to go silent sometimes and doing interesting things with ambient noise. Every so often you go into a forest in the game and it's like, wow, this is creepy and weird, and I can hear crickets, and what's that noise off there? And I think they could actually do something really interesting if they sometimes, especially the first time you enter an area, if they could do something interesting, let it go silent, do something interesting with ambient noise, and see where that goes.
I think some MMOs are pretty good at this because of how much time is spent. They tend to space their music out a lot. I know World of Warcraft does. That's the one I primarily played. And that way you can get a feel for the music, but they just do incredible, World of Warcraft at least, and I hope some other MMOs, does incredible sound design so that you get a sense of your atmosphere, not just because of what the music that's playing. Sometimes that can be a lot more effective, I agree.
Yeah, and World of Warcraft also has the benefit of, having an 8-minute track or something.
Yeah.
And there are multiple parts within it that have small melodies and that are distinctive on their own, but simply remind you of where you are. And the rest of the time it just continues slowly.
And they're smart because they'll fade into different parts of the same 8-minute track, so it won't always be like, oh, the song is starting again. That's a big problem I had at Guild Wars 1. Guild Wars 1 had a pretty bad problem about that, unfortunately. But one thing that I would like to see Elder Scrolls try is to give certain areas and certain cultures different instrumentation.
Yep.
What if when you were exploring a Dunmer camp, it would play, I don't know, some very faint cellos in the background.
Skyrim did that with its DLC because it brought back Morrowind music for Solstheim.
Oh my gosh.
That
you don't even understand how happy that made me. But anyway, I think, that'd be very neat.
Absolutely.
Just to, not only would it give the entire soundtrack some variety, but it would let you know where you are, just to be another tool to let you understand the world around you without telling you stuff from an NPC, which Elder Scrolls has notoriously been bad about with their main story missions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So, we have one question left here about the Elder Scrolls. Question number 7. And I'm not sure I have an answer to this one yet, so Here's for improvisation. If you had to describe Elder Scrolls music in a single word, what would it be? And I'm going to steal the answer.
Hey, I know what I'm answering.
I can't resist a joke like that.
I know. Steven, I'm going to go in order of your Skype icons.
I would probably choose the word horizons.
Horizons.
I guess.
Because of Far Horizons?
No, of course not.
I choose the word far. So together, we're brothers, we choose Far Horizons.
I would choose the word horizon because of Distant Horizons, which is another excellent song from Skyrim. Okay, no. There are two songs. I don't know. Deal with it. I think I would choose that because especially Morrowind, but also the other games, to an extent, feels like I'm always looking off in the distance, and there's always some adventure just past that next hill or just behind that building. And the music never, or very rarely, takes off in a crescendo epic moment. It's always just moving you forward. And it's like, what's over there? Now rest here for a while at your camp. But then at dawn, head to the seashore and see if you can find another Silt Strider. It always sounds like there's this magical world all around you that you must explore. Yeah. So I guess that's the word I would pick.
Okay, then. Joshua.
Yeah, I'm having a really hard time with this because the question is describing the music, and all I can think of is describing the feeling that I have when I listen to the music, which doesn't actually describe the music. It describes the corresponding emotion to the music.
All right, let me rephrase the question. If you were to describe what you feel when you listen to the Elder Scrolls music in a single word, what would it be?
Okay, I guess it's nostalgia.
Interesting. When did you first play Morrowind?
What's that?
When did you first play Morrowind?
When it came out.
Okay, so that could be nostalgic.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it was late 90s, I guess. So, you know.
I think
2000. Morrowind? Are we talking? Morrowind was 2002.
2002. Something. Or a year off.
I thought Morrowind was late 90s, but even so, that's still 13 years ago.
Ugh, that's weird. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's long enough for some nostalgia, especially in video game years.
Oh, yeah, I'm nostalgic for it, and I played it a few years after release, so definitely.
So, yeah, it makes me want to go back there again. I mean, and it makes me want to experience the curiosity. But there's also something really evocative about the world, and maybe that's a better word for it. It's evocative of wanting, genuinely feeling like this is a real place and wanting to know about it.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. Yes. I totally agree with that one. What about you, Kevin?
I feel like I've already gone there with this one. Archetypical really is a great word for me.
You answered this question the second I asked you about Elder Scrolls.
Yeah, and it's funny because I wasn't really thinking that far ahead. It was just sort of an accident. But I do think that it's the bedrock upon which most fantasy music in games is built around. So.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
I'm still feeling a little defensive, but okay.
Yeah. I mean, I
defensive.
I should have probably said this in the beginning. Morrowind is my single favorite soundtrack from any work of fiction in the world. But I do agree, archetypical is a pretty good word for the series as a whole.
I think Morrowind especially. I like the soundtracks a lot more than Kevin seems to. But I understand, especially in Oblivion and in Skyrim, and just Jeremy Soul's body of work in general. That is biggest problem. I mean, his combat music is also rarely good, and I forgot to mention that. And not liking Elder Scrolls music, because I almost always think the music in combat is a weak point. I just don't think he's gotten down a good sound for that. Not only that, but he uses that same style for all of his fantasy games that I have heard. So.
Right. Well, I want to be clear too that I'm trying to toe the line because I don't want it to make it sound like archetypical is a bad thing. It's sort of like what TV Tropes says on their main page. It's like we're about celebrating fiction. We're not about and tropes on the whole are not cliches. And so I want to be very careful. I'm not calling it out as like, oh, this is incredibly cliched. Although I do sometimes think it can be. Yeah. But more that this is like, this is the standard by which most fantasy music in games is now put against.
It's like calling Lord of the Rings archetypical.
Right.
You're not criticizing it for that.
It's Lord of the Rings is like dictionary definition and archetypical, and yet I love it with my entire soul. Cool. So,
exactly.
All right.
So yes, I do agree with you, Kevin. I won't be defensive anymore.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. I'm
sorry you agree with me.
I'm not sure I have a good single word to define this. I've been thinking about it a long time. I'm going to have to go with elder.
That's great. That's so what your answer would be.
So elder's a comparative. So elder than what?
Than your answers. I don't know. I don't think this far ahead, Josh. I live in the moment, so I already forgot what
You're only the host of our podcast.
Right. And as a host, I'm moving on to question number 8.
Okie dokie.
What have you been working on? And this is the time to plug your projects. Joshua, you're not working on anything, right? You're lazy.
I am the laziest working man in I don't know what industry you would say I'm in.
What? You're in what? The club?
What do you say at parties?
I don't know.
What do I say at parties? I say that I'm a PhD student of systematic theology, and
that gets the conversation
sort
flowing.
of look at me and go either what's theology or what's systematic theology. So that's going on right now. I finished my coursework there, and I'm working on my comps and my last language. We have to do 4 languages for our PhD, so I'm plugging away at my last language and preparing for my comprehensive exams, which is about 15,000 pages of reading for some tests.
So would you be able to finish the rest of this answer in a different language?
No. We're only asked to be able to read ancient Latin and Greek and then modern German and French. We don't have to be able to speak them.
Okay, that's the point.
Oh, darn. I was hoping you could rattle off like some Aramaic or something, because that would be pretty cool.
My Hebrew is rusty, and Aramaic is close enough to the Hebrew that I know that I could rattle off a bit of Hebrew, but it wouldn't be relevant to what we're talking about.
That's actually true, so feel free to go.
So that is sort of taking up most of my time. But I'm also recently just had my first book published. I edited and wrote the introduction and 2 of the essays in a book called Past the Sky's Rim: The Elder Scrolls and Theology, in which myself and a number of other academics take a look at different aspects of the Elder Scrolls world and think about them theologically. So there are essays in there. A gentleman, Michael Zeigler, has an essay on atheism and the Dwemer, and sort of...
Brian was telling me about that one. I think we were talking about it for 20 minutes. That's a super fascinating subject.
Yeah, he does some really interesting stuff. A gentleman called Joshua Gonerman writes about the tribunal and the Christian concept of the Trinity and compares those. I have an essay at the end, which you can actually see a shorter version of it on I think it's Ontology Geek or ontologicalgeek.com that I did for them about a year ago, where I basically explain a theory, what I call an empirical theory of metaphysics, where we're able to look at virtual worlds and work out how sort of parent realities can interact with child realities without breaking their purpose, I guess. Sort of taking the Elder Scrolls or Pac-Man as an example and saying, okay, well, when we interact with Pac-Man, we're, as far as his nature goes, we're interacting supernaturally, and we're not actually doing any harm to his world. In fact, it
seems all internally consistent to his rules.
Exactly right.
It doesn't seem like, oh, there's a miracle happening here because it's not consistent with my rules. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So using that as a model for how a spiritual existence could affect our own or a other existence.
Right, exactly. And kind of working that out as a whole metaphysical system that allows even 2 child realities to sort of interact with each other. So if I'm playing Pac-Man and you're playing Pong and I bump you because of something that happened in my game, you can talk about causality moving from Pac-Man's world into the game of Pong by means of the parent reality. So it raises a lot of questions about, dialogues with science, dialogues with questions of meaning in virtual worlds. And I'm actually giving a paper at the National Conference for the American Academy of Religion on some of these issues later this year.
Cool.
So that's the book. The other two things that I'm working on is I'm sort of looking for agents right now for my novel that I wrote over the first year of my PhD and sort of edited over the second year of it. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that's happening right now is I don't know, so when is the show going up?
This show will be up this Saturday. Or next Saturday.
So the 19th?
Next Saturday, 19th.
So 2 days from now on the 21st, the first episode of my radio drama that I'm writing and producing, The Adventures of Lord Dinby Witherspoon, Duke of Space, will be appearing, so you can go look for that, I guess, too.
Where would you find that? Like, are you making some own website for it, or are you putting it up iTunes feed?
Yeah, there will be an iTunes feed, so you'll be able to look up that, but also the episodes will be posted to dukeofspace.com, which is right now kind of a sort of a coming soon website, but that will be getting filled out over there. Well, I guess by the time this is up, it'll be filled out.
Nice.
Awesome. That is amazing. I love audio dramas. Yes. Whales are Whales. Everyone at Whales are Whales loves audio dramas.
So this is what a person who I described it to came back and said, well, it sounds like this to me, and he was right on. It's basically P.G. Wodehouse meets 1930s pulp science fiction.
Nice. I'm getting a much better feel for what this is then. Yeah, that's vivid.
That's cool. And Josh, actually, we've known him for quite a while now.
Yes.
He was good pals with our video game podcast, Disembodied Voices, which is still going on. That's how we kind of ended up meeting him.
And I remember I originally saw the theology podcast Josh was doing. Just you posted something on Giant Bomb about it.
Yeah, that's right.
And I just started listening.
Is that how you guys found us? Was the thing I felt really terrible about? Was
it was like peddling your wares on the forums.
Yes,
yeah, it works, man.
On the Giant Bomb forums.
Yeah. And I just thought, hey, theology video game podcast. That really sounds interesting. What the heck?
That sounds specifically interesting to our relevant interests. And since we couldn't find a better one or any other one, we had to listen to Josh.
Yeah, we were the worst theology and video game podcast out there, run by seminarians. So
you're also the best. True. So
unfortunately, that podcast is not running anymore. But I don't know. Maybe you can find it on the internet somewhere. I love listening.
Hey, do you have any plans to start podcasting up again, or is that just not on the plate for your time right now?
Or is earning a PhD and writing a novel enough for your hobbies?
I mean, I genuinely miss the podcasting. So we had revitalized No Avatars Allowed, which was the podcast. Earlier, sort of late last year, and we went into early this year. And then what had been great about doing it with Ben Wallace, my original co-host, was that he was a formally trained theologian. Don't tell him I said this. But he was extremely knowledgeable about the topics that I had also been trained in. When I brought on Ian and Nicole, they were more knowledgeable about video games than I was. And Ian is minoring in religious studies, which he's more focused on theology than he is religious studies. But he's just sort of starting out in his education on this stuff, and so there was less of an ability to really kind of like hammer out like really difficult issues. So it became a different thing than what we had done. So I am confident that if I come to a point where one, I'm not bored about kind of talking about video game news again every week, because that was probably the biggest factor. Was I was like, okay, we're going to talk about video game news again this week, and I'm a little bit if I can find a place or a group of people where I feel like we're on equal footing when it comes to theology stuff, and they're super interested in video games, then what I think will probably happen is I'll give Ian a call back up again, and we'll get that going again with one or two more people, because it was a lot of fun, and I would love to do it again, but it needed a little bit more than what we were able to do together.
Absolutely. And I remember also enjoying Crossed Purposes, which is the one you did with your people at college.
Right, yes.
And that was really good. It wasn't video game specific, but it was pop culture. But so I know you can put together a really good like theology video game podcast. It's just tough to get the stars to align, it seems like.
Yeah. It's the people who I know who, I mean, even Joshua Gonnerman, who was on that podcast, contributed to the book. But they just don't play nearly as many video games as I do.
No, it was mostly TV shows, and it had to be other topics. Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah. So it's a little bit hard to get that perfect sort of combination.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really interested because I have the knowledge base to want to be interested, but not enough to talk about it. So I really need a podcast to listen to people talk about that. Yeah. So get on that. Kevin, you also run a podcast.
Yeah, and I don't want to one-ups or anything, but I'm an actual Duke of Space.
That is also true.
See, I only
why did we not introduce you as that?
In addition to being the president of the Ukraine, Kevin VanOrd.
I forgot about that. So now I honestly feel very humbled now because I'm not doing anything that sounds nearly so interesting, so vital, or so intellectual.
Yep.
So I'm afraid I'm going to have to content myself with telling you that I'm working on the usual reviews. I'm in the middle of reviewing Divinity: Original Sin, which is taking me forever.
That game sounds so interesting to me.
It is very interesting, and I highly recommend it.
Yes, cool.
I need to get back. I'm in the midst of writing a fairly long treatise on Half-Life 2.
This is the longest outro ever, but I want to ask you a quick question about Divinity, which is just how is the co-op in that? Because it sounded so interesting to me. Have you seen how that's handled? Does it seem good?
It's good. I haven't done a lot of it yet. It takes some coordination.
Okay.
But gotcha. You can't just. I mean, you can go off and sort of do your own thing, but you're probably not going to accomplish a lot.
Cool. And it's just two players, and you both take a predefined role in the story, right?
Yeah, you both take on you both get your two characters, and you go through.
Interesting.
On your own, you get sort of your four characters, and you're going through, and in that sense, it's rather Baldur's Gate style kind of, but not really. It's hard to get an idea without me going into it.
And that's what interests me is when I first saw it, I'm just that's just a Diablo clone, or that's just a this, and I started reading the details, and I'm I can't put this into a box. What is this game?
It's a lot of things, but a Diablo clone is so not what
I just saw a screenshot.
Yeah, it's not even close to that.
That made me happy. So, cool.
But, and so beyond that, again, just doing this Half-Life 2 thing has ended up being a much bigger project than I expected to, and it's hard to find the time, because I'm essentially going through the entire game and sort of digging apart its philosophical and narrative implications, with a little bit of gameplay in there too. But I'm mostly interested in the game and how it relates to, how it relates to how we saw the Soviet Union at that time, the Chernobyl incident, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of sort of Soviet propaganda type stuff in that game, and there's a lot of parallels coming from. I mean, it was a post 9/11 work number one, but it also has a lot of things to say about Soviet propaganda, about government control, about all sorts of interesting things.
So now that you've done all this analysis on it, what does that tell you about when Half-Life 3 is coming?
Well, I have no clever answer for that.
I just always remember you retweet that Twitter account that says, when is Half-Life 3? Is Half-Life 3 out yet? And it's just no.
It's just the Twitter account is HL3 out yet.
Yeah.
And it just tweets no periodically.
Right.
And I love that account a great deal. Lots of respect for that. So I can't say I'm doing anything with theology. I spend lots of spare time researching astrophysics and particle physics, but that's not. I don't really have any project wrapped up in that. Oh well, I do. I am working on a Project Spark project. Project Spark being
awesome.
A creation tool that's in beta, and unfortunately, the last update borked my project quite good. So
just release it as early access, see if you can get some money from it.
So I'm kind of sad about that because I spent a lot of time making that.
That stinks. The danger of beta or whatever.
It really is, but and I didn't really have the heart to start from scratch since I'd already poured 25 hours into it. So,
and you do a weekly podcast, right, with the GameSpot crew?
I do a GameSpot gameplay. We try to do video every week, but I do audio typically, as long as I have people to be on. Last week was July 4th, so that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But look for it on iTunes. You can just search for GameSpot Gameplay, and you can follow it in your favorite RSS feed player thing.
Probably an iTunes iPhone.
Yeah.
Click on some buttons. It'll probably make it to your ears.
Yeah, pretty much. It's an iTunes. It's on the Zune. It's in the Zune store.
Oh, really? Android people go for podcasts. I don't even know.
Android people? There are lots of different podcast players. You can just get one.
Okay.
Dogpile was one, I think, that I used. Was it Dogpile? Something with a dog.
That's a search engine.
Oh, yeah, it's
Did
not
you use Ask Jeeves to listen to your podcast?
I know. I usually go to NPR to find out about podcasts. Then I Google or I ask Jeeves it, I suppose, until I find something on Zoom.
Okay. Gosh, all right.
Dogcatcher is what I use.
There you go.
It was Dogcatcher, not Dogpile. They're very different things.
Yeah. But yeah, GameSpot Gameplay has been going on a while. It's a really good podcast, though. Unfortunately, last time Kevin was on our show, I believe he said we had the definitively best podcast in the world. I think he wanted to eat dinner and he was desperate, so he just agreed to say that.
Remember that?
So
I'm really hungry right now.
I know. It's because we always keep it for 2-hour podcasts.
All right. So where can people find you on the internet? Like Twitter account, what have you?
Oh, me?
Yeah. People want to know about you, Kevin.
On Twitter, it's FiddleCub, so it's fiddle like a violin, followed by cub, C-U-B.
Cool.
And then I don't know.
Just go to GameSpot.com. You'll probably be on there.
Send me an email at kevinv@gamespot.com if you want. Although the most recent email I got from a listener was actually hate mail for Tom McShay.
Sorry, that was from me.
So what do? Somebody's super mad at him for saying that he won't play Metal Gear Solid 1.
Why won't he play Metal Gear Solid 1?
Jeez. Oh, it was you.
Because he doesn't like going back to those old, 3D games and seeing how ugly they are.
Okay. Well, that's a fair statement.
So,
okay, gotcha. Well. Where can people find you on the internet, Joshua?
Best place is Twitter. Joshua WWISE. So Joshua W Wise. If you could find my email, go ahead and shoot me an email. But Twitter's the best way.
Gotcha. Very cool. And Steven?
Well, the most important thing is to go to whalesourwhales.com, which is the website that houses all of our podcasts, including Train Station at 8.
Yep.
You can follow that at Whales or Whales on Twitter. I'm Stephen Kelly 180 on Twitter, and Brian is Lord Meldor. That's with 2 R's at the end. Mm-hmm. And as for what we're working on, we recently sent out a huge batch of invites for Train Station at 8, which is very good news because for a while we were running out of guests.
Yeah.
So we should have a lot more interesting people, just like Josh and Kevin.
Yeah, they were one of the invites that went out.
Yes.
Big batch. Mm-hmm. Really happy they were playing.
And we actually have 2 new projects coming out of Whales or Whales right now. We're designing the logos and the websites and all sorts of things for them, and that could be coming out in the next month. So that's exciting.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I can't wait. I don't know who we can announce from who we're having because we haven't finalized dates with a lot of them.
We haven't even recorded it yet, but whatever.
But we are very excited about several people we will be recording with soon.
Yes.
So,
yes.
That's going to be great.
Sometimes.
All right, yeah, and check us out on iTunes. We are there. We're not on the Zune store, I'm sorry, but we are on iTunes.
What are we doing?
Leave us a review. That would be great. We could really use them. And just, email us with any comments you have. Tweet at us. It's just great to hear any feedback. And answer the 8 questions of the episode for yourself. They're on our show notes. So go ahead and leave that in the comments. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And woo, yes. That is appropriate, Kevin. Thank you, Steven.
No problem.
Exactly. And to everyone else out there listening, say goodbye to the monkey border.
Oops, I wasn't recording.
What?
I know, it's the old joke. It's the old joke. Yep.